Okay, so welcome everybody. My name is Shan and I'll be chairing, and I would just like to first acknowledge the owners of the land where I am speaking from, which is also the Yagara and Turrbal people here in Brisbane, Meanjin, but I'm at home right now, not at QUT. And today we have Anisa Rogers and Will Ross here, who will be giving a sort of 50-minute workshop around how to make meaningful change and avoid greenwashing. So I think should run on from the really interesting presentation we just had as well. I'll hand over to Anisa and Will now, but let me know if you need any help from my end with Q&A, things like that.
Thanks, Sean. So I'm going to share my screen and jump into the recording. And that should bring everyone in there. Can everyone see that? Great. So yeah, before we kick this off, we're going to have a bit of a chat today about greenwashing and what it means, what's actually meaningful, and how we can avoid doing it. But before we do that, acknowledging as well that Anisa and I are both here today on Wurundjeri land with the Woiwurrung language group in the Kulin Nation. And everyone here is coming from, places all across this continent, which are all sovereign lands. So paying respect and keeping in mind when we talk about something like greenwashing that, corporations have been at the forefront of dispossession for First Nations people since the invasion of this continent in 1788. And the pursuit of profit has a lot to answer for in the damages that have been caused. So when we talk about resisting corporations and greenwashing, that's something that we should keep at the forefront of what we do. So I'm Will. My pronouns are they, them, and I might allow Anisa to introduce themselves as well.
Hi, Anisa.
And we're going to have a bit of a chat about greenwashing today. So I'm going to hand it over to Anisa to chat about some core values.
Awesome. Yeah, so we thought we're going to try a little experiment on using fancy online participatory things, because ideally we'd be in a room with a whiteboard. Whiteboards are the ultimate workshop thing, but we're going to try something different because we thought it'd be good to kind of just check in about our core values. As when we're coming up against things like greenwash, it can get a bit full on and muddling. So we thought we wanted to ask everyone in the room, get a bit of a collection of what are our core values, so we can keep them in mind. And then we'll talk a little bit about capitalism and greenwashing, and hopefully we'll have a bunch of time for a good discussion at the end. So I'm going to nick the screen sharing from Will and do this. And so you should be able to go to www.menti.com and use the code, or I'll put the link in the chat. You can go to that, and I'll give everyone a couple of minutes to type in, and they should just appear on the screen. I have seen someone else do this and it was really cool. So really hoping that we can work that out. If anyone needs help, we're in. Then just take yourself off mute or chuck in the chat. This is great. Honesty, degrowth, empathy, life. That's fixing your own backyard, yeah, before you go and dig up someone else's. I like that one. Oh, wow. Self-determination, justice, cooperation. Yeah, that's beautiful. Cool. Has everyone had a chance to chuck something in? It's so hard not to see everyone. I'm jealous of all of you in the room together. Oh, 7 people. Okay, cool. That's probably quite a lot of us. So yeah, yeah, this is awesome. I think a lot of us, these are all values that are very much on the same page. And yeah, I guess what could be expected for a group of people who've come together to try and work out how to make the world a more caring and compassionate and sustainable place. Fair share, decolonizing, beautiful. Commoning, I love that word. Up with the commons. Will, did you want to jump back and overtake the screen share and we can start the presentation?
Yes, let's go. That should do it.
Beautiful. So yeah, now that we've looked at all of our values, we can compare them to the values of what we're up against. And I'm sure a lot of you here, given this is the new economy space, probably have quite a good understanding of capitalism, but we thought we'd just quickly go through it just to help us all be on the same page. And because before we understand greenwashing, we really need to understand what is this economic system that we're in, and so how does that, keep greenwashing going? So capitalism, it's the pursuit of private profit for private gain. So everyone, in order to survive, if anyone's had a business, you need to profit, and you need to try and make sure your profits are the same or greater than other businesses that you're competing against. And that's true for small businesses and big businesses. There's obviously some nuance in there, but in general, this is the system that we're in. And so that leads to competition, and everyone's focusing on their own specific making of things. And yeah, it ends to this quest for infinite material growth. People just keep making and making stuff. And so yeah, I really liked this quote, which says, capitalism places every person in competition with their fellows for a share of the available wealth. A few people accumulate big piles, but most do not. The sense of community falls victim to the struggle. So that's a lot of our values that we were talking about. Next slide. And so here's a couple of graphs that I pulled out just to kind of show, what's been happening since capitalism jumped into our world a couple of 100 years ago. The one on the left kind of shows the extreme advance of how much land is being used for agriculture. And yeah, that's not very good for the animals. Most of the agriculture is pretty cruel to them. It's also really bad for the environment. So much land. Like there are now, in terms of mass, there are more kind of humans and the animals that we produce than the mass of all the other animals in the world. So we've really kind of taken over and taking up a lot of space and doing a lot of damage. And this second graph kind of shows the rise of GDP, the gross domestic product, which our economies unfortunately are measured in because it's a really, really bad measurement for well-being. That it shows that as GDP is rising, so is the carbon dioxide and fossil fuels in the atmosphere. Next slide. And so why is it so destructive? It's kind of hand in hand with this, like capitalism is hugely productive because of this competition. So much stuff is being made, which is, we get some nice stuff. I definitely enjoy a whole bunch of the things that capitalism has created. But it's beyond what is ever necessary, and it's really destructive. As we can see by, these are all the different phones over 8 years. This is part of the planned obsolescence, because if you're in competition, you need to be trying to sell more than your competitors, and companies end up doing this stupid stuff by making products break or making us feel like we need the newest one. Fossil fuels are obviously a really big part of this. And I highly recommend the book Fossil Capital if anybody wants to do a deep dive into the history of fossil fuels and capitalism and how directly intertwined they are. The monocropping food systems and so many parts of our food system is really destructive. And if anybody has any other ideas about what are the different things that make capitalism so destructive, feel free to write them in the chat.
Yeah, I might throw something in as well. Just what you're saying about the iPhones, Nice. I think you're going to touch on this later, but the element of profit and bottom line often means that the cheapest available way to source some kind of resource is the one that is used most often by companies. And thinking about how much of like lithium that goes into batteries is just thrown out and not recycled because it's expensive and energy intensive to recycle it. But it's the way the system is set up, it's so much cheaper to actually just pour it, dig it out of the ground, take it out of salt flats, and whatever damage that does to the local ecology, that continues because it's the cheapest available setup. Yeah.
Do you want to take it from here, Will? Do you want me to?
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in here. So greenwashing. One great definition for greenwashing is disinformation disseminated by an organization to present an environmentally responsible public image. But I think that picture that we popped in there kind of captures it best. It's often as simple as taking something that was already happening or that was already being done by a company and painting it green in whatever way you can. Usually with words, with pictures. I mean, we've all seen the kinds of ads that fossil fuel companies will put out that very much focus on the kind of environmental side of their operations. And these kind of stock images of like seedlings bursting out of the soil, people holding dirt in their hands, families hugging in some kind of remote camping location, the kind of stuff that you would associate with greenwashing. But maybe chatting about what greenwashing does and some examples will illustrate that. So greenwashing, it tends to promise that we can have what we've got already, but just make it greener, make it more environmentally friendly. And usually science and tech and growth are kind of tangled up in that. So this idea that, oh, we can keep growing and actually that's what we should do because growing can be good for the environment. And yeah, some good examples of green mining, which is kind of this huge shift to renewable materials and sustainable stuff that's needed for the sustainable tech revolution. And the mining industry is kind of really getting excited about this whole big shift because it's an opportunity to make a huge amount of money and keep their operations going, but just start excavating other stuff that happens to be for sustainable technology, but isn't actually very sustainable to dig up. And that kind of ties into the green consumerism. Is the bottom end of that scale. What comes out the other end is we're told we can keep buying stuff and keep using the same stuff and getting new things. And it's good for the environment because it's green. But what actually happens under that kind of greenwashing? As we were saying, you get more of the same, but just with a green color to it. Or even worse, it can kind of legitimize these companies that are actually doing things that are really damaging for human livelihoods, non-human livelihoods, the environment. And one example that comes to mind is greenwashing in kind of those big agricultural companies like Monsanto, who in the last few years have put out these huge campaigns to say, we are this environmentally responsible, we can genetically modify crops so they use a third less water than they actually use. Meanwhile, they're being sued in the Hawaiian Islands because they're using 80% of the water table for their labs in the kind of the area where they develop their biotech and where they develop their GMO crops. And then even things like, Monsanto pushing the idea that we can continue to grow more because we've got a growing population. It kind of furthers this myth that monocrop agriculture is the only way to feed the planet. Whereas when that succeeds, it pushes smaller farmers out who are often doing more sustainable practices. That makes farmers more dependent on these seed companies, which just reduces the resilience of our food system so much. I think Nice has a good example that could be shared as well.
Yeah, thanks, Will. Yeah, I just wanted to touch on the renewable energy and green tech mining. And I've been reading this amazing report by Friends of the Earth in Europe that's called Green Mining is a Myth. And it's just showing how, so many corporations, our government right now at COP26, they've got a stall there sponsored by Santos saying carbon capture and storage is the future. There's just so much talk about, all the new mining that needs to be done for renewable energy and the green technology future. And it's not to say that like renewable energy is wonderful. We need renewable energy, But the greenwashing part comes in when they then use this rhetoric of greenwashing to continue doing all the damaging things and not taking account for the damaging things that are going on and have happened in the past. And so, yeah, we're definitely not saying that renewable energy is bad, but we just need to be able to unpick what is greenwashing and what is useful. And often, if there's profit to be made, then it's really important to question really, really hard why a big company like Santos, why Monsanto are trying to use that rhetoric. Because at the end of the day, if they want to survive and make the profits and keep their shareholders happy, they need to make that money. And profit is always going to be more important. You know, the next slide. Yeah, so I guess this is the question: can you have good sustainable capitalism? Is green capitalism possible? We'll have an open discussion at the end. So that these are questions to start getting into your heads. But just to briefly touch on it, there are positives of what's going on. There are positives that capitalism has brought us, technologies that are really good and have helped make the world more comfortable. But if we continue in this mindset of growth and profit and competition, then no matter what good things are coming out, it's still going to be this destruction. And Michelle put an amazing quote in the chat from Tyson Yunkaporta that if we do this presentation again, I'll probably nick to put in, because it just sums it up so well. Do you have anything to add, Will, or should we go to the next slide?
Yeah, I think that covers it. Let's go to the next one.
Oh, cool. Okay, I will grab your steal from, oh, sorry, get that up. We're doing a bit of screen share swapping around. Sure. So we just thought we'd put on a video, an example of what we think is greenwashing by BHP. So we can just, I'm not sure, I used to, whenever I went to the cinema, I'd see this ad. So I've, thought we could play it now.
As the world moves to cleaner, more sustainable transport, we're going to need more copper. Because even an electric car needs 4 times as much copper as a standard car. So some might be surprised to know it's actually copper mines like the Olympic Dam in South Australia that are helping build a cleaner world. Think big.
So yeah, like I'll be interested to see what people think about that. Maybe, yeah, if people have any comments, maybe we can just, I think we're going fine for time. What do people think about that ad? Feel free to jump off mute or chuck something in the chat. There's been some good stuff chucked in the chat.
Yeah, or maybe anybody in the room who might have something they wanted to say. I loved the 4 times as much as a standard car, just putting that front and center.
Yeah, saying we're going to need a lot of this. But they don't. I was watching a couple of other ones and they say this could be used for this stuff. They don't actually say where their copper is going. They say what it could be used for. In the chat, Kira's saying so frustrating that they can just lie. And yeah, I have a deep fear that carbon sequestration and biodiversity markets are greenwashing too.
Yeah.
Matthew Rimmer here. Just a quick comment.
Mm.
It's been interesting to see that some consumer regulators are finally taking action against greenwashing. So in Australia, the big action was against Volkswagen, both over its advertisements, but also over its defeat devices that kind of misled authorities about their actual emissions. So it's been interesting that, you know, around the world, there's been a number of actions in relation to Volkswagen's misleading deceptive conduct. Sometimes also some of the advertising regulators have been taking action over misleading and deceptive representations. I met an interesting professor at the University of Oregon who's busy collecting fossil fuel advertisements, and she kind of gets people to judge and rate advertisements in terms of what impact they think that they have and whether or not they think they're misleading or deceptive. So that's a kind of an interesting strategy as well. But I just thought I'd chip in to the conversation.
Oh, thank you so much. That's so, yeah, if you have any links to that project, because I think part of what we need to do is practice and kind of teach others how to not just fall into the lines that are being sold to us, and understand that it is advertising, which is it is manipulation to sell something. Yeah. Oh, and Scotty's asking, isn't Olympic Dam a uranium mine? Yes, it's a uranium and copper mine. So it's great how they chuck in Olympic Dam, which is in South Australia, and there's been traditional owners fighting against that mine for decades. And they're just, yeah, they kind of lump it in as a copper mine. They skirt over the fact that it's uranium, which is very controversial for many, many reasons. One thing, I'll put the link in the chat later, but I did want to share, as an example of a good resource that we can use to kind of unpick what's actually going on. The Rainforest Action Group did this great report about BHP in South America. So it's something, yeah, I have it printed out at my house. So you're kind of ready to whip out some examples of like, what is, BHP actually doing. I think today there was a protest in Rio, or somewhere in Brazil, against the San Marco iron ore mine, which people might have heard a few years ago collapsed and covered a whole village in sludge and killed some people. It was pretty horrible, and it's the anniversary of that accident, and the residents are saying BHP has not honoured the agreement. Sure, they've paid some people some money, but they haven't done their due diligence in fixing up what they caused. So reports like this are a really good tool for us to be able to have examples. And yeah, through all the nice talk of sustainability, we need to keep pointing out the bottom line for these companies is growth and profit, unfortunately.
If I could just chip in quickly again, I think an interesting contrast could be drawn with how we've dealt with big tobacco. We have heavily regulated and banned tobacco advertising across mass media and social media because it has been inherently deceptive. There has been some discussion about whether or not we need to take a much harder line in terms of the massive advertising and sponsorship and soft power strategies used by fossil fuel companies. Maybe we do need to kind of strip away advertising altogether. Some have kind of suggested we need to kind of have warnings for fossil fuels, much like we have in relation to tobacco, but we also need to kind of strip back their ability to kind of engage in direct advertising to consumers.
Yeah, I mean, getting rid of advertising in general is a great strategy to kind of reduce consumption and stop those with money being able to persuade people. Will?
Yeah, maybe to add to that as well, not allowing fossil fuel companies to lobby governments and political parties. And, in other parts of the world, it's such a big problem of fossil fuel companies having their own security forces that they usually use against local protesters, people trying to protect their land. So yeah, there's a lot we could do.
And in the chat, Michelle's mentioning that the University of Oregon has a greenwashing index. That is awesome. This is one of the reasons I love running workshops at spaces like this, because I'm going to go away and have a whole bunch more things to look into and understand. That is really exciting, to be able to have something that we can all kind of use as an easy index to just judge what's going on. But I wonder, are there, we've done our very brief presentation, and it's so good that people have all these. I wonder if people have any questions or any disagreements, because I do know that sometimes it can feel a bit hard if we're pushing back against what feels like the solutions. So please jump in with any more comments or questions, and we'll keep reading out what's in the chat.
Another quick comment from Matthew. I think the presentation is really timely given the current investigation by the US Congress of big oil companies. So you might have seen last week that all the major oil companies had to present to a congressional committee, a House Oversight Committee, and really Ro Khanna and AOC and Representative Maloney were asking them questions about whether or not they had funded climate misinformation or disinformation, and they have sought subpoenas from them, so to try to seek evidence about what they've been actually doing. So as well as kind of legal action and community action, we do finally now have this opportunity for some sort of political action to be taken in relation to the massive greenwashing that has been taking place by the big oil companies. So I'm really interested to see what will come out of that investigation into Exxon and Shell and Chevron and others.
Yeah, no, that's really exciting, and I think that's a really good way to look at how we can fight green. There's the personal and kind of how we respond and how we live. There's the community, and then taking it to the political stage, and there's a lot of different avenues to be fighting greenwashing on. Did anyone else have any comments? Oh yes.
G'day, Scotty here.
Hello.
Hey, yeah, look, I reckon it's the crux of it all comes down to the investment model. And if the people who've put in the money are outside of the community and they want a huge amount of value back, it has to come out of nature, whether that's humans as part of nature and part of society, or the rest of the natural world. It's going to suck it out of us, and somehow magically in that process it destroys those things. I'm not quite sure what that connection is between the extraction and the destruction, but economic value seems to equal destruction of a local place somehow. And if we can get community investment rather than financial investment, I think that we're really hitting a good stride there, so that again it can stay in the community and be for the community, both the natural place and the human place.
Yeah, so definitely being really cautious about any kind of group or individual who's coming in somewhere. Because I think it's really hard. Like, I've been involved in fighting against Adani for a while, and being up in central Queensland and seeing how Adani runs the local, show in the local town, and they sponsor the police station, and they bring all this stuff to the community.
And they bring poison.
Yeah. Like if a group is going to be profiting, there's probably something not right happening.
Yeah, I think if if you find that they're listed on the stock market, run a mile, because they've also even got, there's specialised companies that vet all of the companies that are listed on the stock market to make sure that they are making enough profit and ripping off enough of nature and enough of people to be sufficiently good for the shareholders. And if they're not, they kick up a big stink in the shareholder community and they get punished for it. So they actually are being pressured in a massive way to actually do all of this stuff. Otherwise, they get the sack.
Yeah, that's such a good point, Scotty. I think it ties into Michelle's comment as well in the chat about greenwashing with things like regenerative agriculture and bringing back biodiversity to soil. There's like such a huge noise around that. I think there was a documentary with like Woody Harrelson or something, but it's already being monetized. Like this idea that the soil needs to be regenerated and looked after properly. Like Michelle was saying there, it's like farmers get these incentives that come from these huge companies and the money doesn't go back to the community, and you end up with this really almost pointless definition of regenerative agriculture that doesn't include the bigger picture. It's such a good point.
I also, sorry, the chair here, but I would love to just also jump in and say I work in the international development space, and I think that in a lot of funding models as well, particularly with the rise of public-private partnerships, those kind of community development initiatives that organizations, particularly around like deforestation and REDD+ kind of organizations, provide those community development initiatives as part of their program and their development funding. And there is a big gap, I suppose, in that service delivery from the government. And so that, you know, fills that gap, and then it just becomes cyclical that, you know, this company is also doing this really positive thing, let alone all of the huge negative things that they're doing. So I think that, I guess, just coming from my sort of professional background, that's a really common issue and like a big challenge when that's increasingly the funding model that a lot of aid funding is sort of moving towards.
Yeah, no, thanks heaps. That's a really good example. That they're the kind of terrify, like what happens when probably a lot of corporations have lobbied governments, and governments, you know, have been pulling back, you know, services that, you know, democratic governments should be providing, and then leaving this space for these corporations. Because I think long ago people would have realized that capitalism was a rort, but then philanthropy and environmental social governance has come in, and it's kind of, you know, as the Tyson Younger Porter quote up above was saying, it's just this constant ability to absorb everything and kind of maneuver around a crisis. And unfortunately, it'll be really interesting to see how the public reacts to what Scott Morrison has brought to COP26. But it is basically a big greenwash scam of here's all this technology that doesn't actually exist, but it's going to save us. And if that will kind of really slow down people kind of standing up and getting angry about climate change, if that'll convince the middle section of society to be like, okay, we don't need to worry about this anymore. So it's really, really difficult. It's a big issue.
Yeah, I guess another part of that is the revolving door where these politicians come straight out of the boardrooms of big companies, into politics, and then back out and straight back into the boardroom again. They're very much in the same, two sides of the same coin. Both parties, both major parties, three sides of the same coin.
And I do wonder, like I'm yet to meet anybody who's been a high-level politician or in a high-level corporation, but what the actual mentality of people are in there. Like, do they genuinely believe that what they're doing is good? Because yeah, as humans, we're so built to kind of fit into what's around us, because otherwise we would have got kicked out of the tribe. And so yeah, our ability, like I just wonder if they understand that they're deceiving the customers, or are they actually deceiving themselves? I wonder if anyone has any insights into the psychology.
Well, if no one else does. I certainly have. Recently, I've been looking at the bloke called Robert Hare who's come up with the psychopathology checklist. And if you look at the psychopathology checklist, which is used in courtrooms all around the world to sentence people, it describes a corporation to the T. It's hilarious. You've really got to look it up. The PCLR, the Psychopathology Checklist Revised. And it does explain a lot of these things, because otherwise they're inexplicable. For decades, I've been going, what the hell is going on with these people? Why would they possibly be doing this? And if they're just psychopaths and they have no empathy and they don't give a stuff what they're doing as long as it suits them, it really fits. So I think what I've taken as my job is to design organisations that are psychopath proof. How do we make an organisation so that the power is held in such a way that one individual cannot grab it? Because if you make a centralised power position, then it's absolutely ripe for a bunch of psychopaths to compete to get into that. And that's what we've got in business and in politics.
That's fascinating. I'm going to be looking that up.
Can I make a comment there? Would that be okay?
Please.
Thanks. So a very interesting point about the psychopaths, and I think it's definitely tempting to see that, and the people in these positions of power are like that. I've been reflecting on the House Standing Committee transcripts of the Whitehaven Coal CEOs and the like, talking to politicians about their work. And I mean, I don't know what they genuinely believe or don't believe, but the stories they tell are, you know, exactly like the ad you showed. They're in very reasonable tones. You know, we need this transition. They make all the right noises. I tend to think, no doubt, there are people in high places who are, you know, really are calculating and only out for profit. In my own work, I've interviewed people in multinational companies, you know, not in the C-suite, but certainly people in very much positions of influence in sourcing and global supply chains. And they genuinely care and are deeply concerned about what they do, but they also, I guess, trying to do the best they can within the area they're in. And I think, and I don't know how everyone else feels, but I feel in my own life, like I have, you know, in my workplace, in my family and so on, I have a certain ability to do things, and then I'm constrained by other things. We all have capabilities, and perhaps some of us are more complicit than others, but I think many of us would feel constrained by the larger systems we find ourselves in. And I think that we can think of people in corporations like that as well, if that's not putting too kind a tone on it.
Yeah, I think that is a good point, and it is it is a struggle, I think, because and there's probably a difference between someone like Scott Morrison and, you know, Gina Reinhardt and all of them to the kind of middle managers or people, because that's why we started the presentation with an understanding of capitalism and the need, like it forces people to compete, and if you don't compete and have your make sure that you're getting profit, then you'll lose your job. And I think a lot of business owners are worried about the livelihoods of their workers as well as their own livelihood. So it's it is a really, really tough position to be in. But then I guess it gets to the point, well, where do we draw a line? And I think, yeah, it's really exciting to see all of the different examples that people have been saying and putting in the chat, because I wonder if out there is a kind of guide of like where the line is too much. What's the line that you wouldn't cross? Would you not work at BHP? What, you know, what's your complicity? Because I think it is a really, really complicated area to think about and to work in.
Yeah, look, I could say one more thing about the psychopathy thing. Well, two. One is that it's quite difficult to bring it up even without sounding like some sort of radical lunatic. And yes, you know, it's not everybody who's in there who is a psychopath at all, but everybody's met a psychopath. They're about 1% of the population, and they're the people who stuff up your community group and then bugger off and that sort of thing. But if you look at where all of our institutional structures came from, we're talking about the structural the structural things in capitalism that drive all of this, where did they come from? They were all basically formed in the 16 and 1700s by when parliaments were fighting the kings. And the corporation came out of that with the big East India Company and the other extractive companies which went overseas to rip off all the third world and keep them in the third world and bring the wealth back to the UK and all the other European colonial powers. And the laws were made then as the parliaments came, and the parliament was made then. So all of our really big structures were made by these people. And if you look at these people, it was only the very top part of the classes. And these guys all had dungeons and they ran peasants on the land until sheep became more profitable, at what point they kicked the peasants off and started running sheep. They all had dungeons in their castles for people who didn't do it. They are pretty clear-cut psychopaths. So it's made for psychopaths by psychopaths. And I would argue that we live in a structure of institutionalized psychopathy. That's my hypothesis.
It should be noted that, corporations law is also shifting and changing. I think directors of companies have all sorts of duties and responsibilities, and there's lots of discussion at the moment about duties and responsibilities in relation to disclosure of climate risks. So, one of the burgeoning kind of fields of climate litigation is going to be against company directors who don't adequately address climate risks or disclose climate risks. It's interesting to see also that there has been cases being brought by equity generation lawyers about one O'Donnell versus the Commonwealth, about the Commonwealth failing to disclose climate risks in relation to government bonds to sovereign bond investors. And there was also another kind of interesting case that they brought against a superannuation fund, claiming that they hadn't properly addressed kind of climate change in terms of their policy. So, while corporations law has kind of, a long and storied history, it's kind of interesting to see that there are certain elements of corporations law that are now having to grapple with some of the impacts of climate change. And, that there's potential for action there. If you're kind of concerned about company directors engaging in greenwashing, there might be a wider array of remedies that are going to be available to deal with that.
I think we should definitely be taking all of the things that are available to us to call this out. But I think, it is really hard to make those changes within a system that was designed to be like this. And I remember back in uni when I was asking my university to stop investing in fossil fuels and talk about the financial risks. And it was just so slow. It's just so slow. So I guess it's us understanding that these are important things, and we all play our part in the movement ecology, but we've really got to be stepping up and pushing ourselves to be like, how do we make this change really quickly, and how do we get rid of these systems? Because capitalism is very pervasive. And Will and I definitely didn't come here today with all the answers, so sorry if you were hoping for that. But this has been really, really, really interesting, and I think a really cool, conversation that, at least for myself, I want to keep having, so I can make sure that my campaigning is not then propping up a lithium mine in Chile, or allowing big corporations to build huge renewable energy plants that are displacing people.
Yeah, and I feel like there were a lot of great answers in there today, and also nice to see some familiar names and faces from yesterday's workshop. So yeah, thanks everyone for rocking up. If anyone has anything else they want to say before we head off as well, maybe we can do that. We've got a couple minutes.
Yeah, if there were any questions online, or maybe anyone else in the room? Michelle?
We have an example, question/example. Here we go, video. So,
Sorry.
So Scott over
Hi.
here. So Scott's from Nundle, and there's a wind farm going in or proposed, is it going? Proposed, Fernando.
Yeah, it's called the Hills of Gold wind farm, and the locals are divided, the population's divided. Well, actually, no, the majority of people don't want it, but people are conflicted because they think renewable energy is a great way to go, but where it's going,
The site where it's positioned.
the site where it's positioning, already there's been land clearing. One of the landholder there, I've had dealings with him in the past, not a very nice fellow. So it's all about money. It's not really about wind. And so they're really destroying the functionality of the environment, the like biological environment, to put up a bunch of egg beaters, you know, that are going to be junk in 25 years. I do believe that, you know, renewable energy is a solution in some instances, but one little slogan that came up, you know, when we're talking about it was, you know, the answer is not mechanical. You know, it's got to be a biological solution. So, and out of that came, in some of my work, was we're focusing on global warming, which is temperature reduction. So if we have a dysfunctional biological environment, or if we have a functioning biological environment, it'll moderate temperature. So is that wind farm that's going in there
that is
really
going
to have a temperature stabilization or temperature moderation effect? And we argue it won't, because they're clearing, ruining ecosystems to put up a mechanical device that has no transpiration or anything else, and it's going to be scrap in 25 years. So, just because it's renewable energy, in this instance, you know, it's in the wrong place. But yeah, so that's the conflict. Yeah.
No, thanks. That's a really good example. And one of the reasons why, you know, I think especially in other countries, like I've talked to the environmental campaigners in India, and they seem a lot further ahead than the narratives in Australia, which is just fossil fuels or renewables. Like that's just too simplistic for the answers, and then leaves so much room for all these corporations to jump in and say, we will do renewables, we will save you, when, you know, it needs to be small scale, community driven renewables plus a reduction in overconsumption. But I guess that doesn't sound as good on a placard. So we got to get inventive and have those conversations. And yeah, I think it's 4:01, and I'm pretty sure that there's another session after this. Yeah.
Yeah, so there is, I think, afternoon tea for the people who are in person, and a good time for everyone else to probably take a break, have a little walk around. Yeah, so thank you so much, Anisa and Will. That was a really interesting session and some great conversations as well. Thank you for your time, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. Thanks everyone for engaging so much with it. It was really great.
Yeah, keep these conversations going. I'm sure we'll see you around. Enjoy the break.
Okay, thanks. I'll stop the recording now.